Hi guys, I would like to thank everyone who donates to the Patreon account. The donations keep the show going. My computer is ready to go kaput after 8 years, so the Patreon fund will help me get another computer, and that will, in turn, enable me to churn out more episodes. There will be more giveaways in the future, and just a reminder, you don't have to give a lot. $1 a month would do. Any amount would be appreciated. Once again, the Patreon account is located at www.patreon.com/leader1. That's Patreon and LEADERONE. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Why do you seem so scared? All I wanted to do was play with you. Please come and play with me. I am so lonely. You're not afraid of the dark, are you? Don't be afraid. Come with me. I will show you where I play hide and seek. Do you want to play hide and seek? You hide, and I'll find you.
Before I begin this episode, I would like to send a happy birthday shout out to VIP listener Krista Andrews. She lit a fire under me to relaunch the podcast in 2020 after I quit working on it in 2019. I owe her so much for what the show's success has brought to me. A happy birthday wish is the least I could do. Happy birthday, Krista. The following is called the Florence Nightingale Pledge. It is recited by nursing school graduates. I solemnly pledge myself before God and in the presence of this assembly to pass my life in purity and to practice my profession faithfully. I will abstain from whatever is deleterious and mischievous and will not take or knowingly administer any harmful drug. I will do all in my power to maintain and elevate the standard of my profession, and will hold in confidence all personal matters committed to my keeping, and all family affairs coming to my knowledge in the practice of my calling. With loyalty will I endeavor to aid the physician in his work, and as a missioner of health, I will dedicate myself to devoted service to human welfare. This is the I am your registered nurse statement of duties. As I care for you, it is my job to protect you from all harm. That means any harm from your illness or its symptoms, from outside forces including the care environment, and from other people if necessary, even those involved with your health care or health financing. As an autonomous health professional who reports only to senior nurses, it is my job to defend you from poor or misguided health care from any source. I am your advocate. I vow to do my best to protect you as if you were a member of my family. Woodstock, Ontario, Canada, like many cities, has a slogan. The slogan is, "The Friendly City." Incidentally, it's the hometown of Terry Lynn McClintock, who kidnapped 8-year-old Tori Stafford so that her boyfriend could rape and murder the child. Woodstock's reputation as the Friendly City was established decades before Tori Stafford's murder. That is likely why, in 1975, Crescent Care decided to build a nursing home in Woodstock. The town of Woodstock, along with its municipal government, was more than happy to welcome the facility. Crescent is a large institution, and its location was considered ideal for its geographical location. It is located minutes away from the 401 highway and it's close to shopping centers. Crescent Care's promise was to take care of, quote, the physical, social, and spiritual needs of our residents, end quote. Crescent featured an active response behavior team for patients struggling with dementia and other mental health and cognitive issues. A restorative care program was initiated to assist patients who wished to reinstate their independence where possible. But of course, like a typical nursing home, it was the last stop for its residents at a time when they could not go on unassisted. And there was only so much the staff could do as the patients coped with their conditions, critical as they were. For area nurses keen to provide care to seniors, it was a step up in their careers. Elizabeth Tracy May Parker was born on June 10th, 1967 in Woodstock. She preferred to be addressed as and referred to as Beth. As a minor, she could be highly disagreeable and transgressive in her behavior, running afoul of rules and chafing against authoritarian expectations. Once, while staying at a summer camp, she ran away for a full day. If someone offended her in high school, she would pull a fire alarm and deflect the blame to the person who affronted her. Nevertheless, she got some enjoyment out of her secondary school experience. She was a member of the choir and band. Elizabeth was accepted by the London Baptist Bible College in London, Ontario. She earned a bachelor's degree in religious education counseling. Upon graduating, she discovered that opportunities in the field for which she trained were hard to come by. Determined to ply a more lucrative trade, she enrolled in the nursing program at Conestoga College in Kitchener, Ontario. She excelled in all the courses, or at least that's what she told everybody she knew. In 1995, Parker was registered as a nurse with the Ontario College of Nurses. Soon into her career, Elizabeth met Daniel Wettlaufer at a Baptist church. They married in 1997 and settled in a bungalow on Winniett Street in Woodstock. The marriage was ill-fated almost from the very beginning. Elizabeth Wettlaufer is bisexual and wished to explore same-sex relations. She began initiating contact with other women. Elizabeth and Daniel separated in 2007. Elizabeth decided to keep her name, but that was her last link to romantic and sexual congress with males. She doubled down on her efforts to link up with other women. She pursued relationships with women she met on a dating website called Gay Canada. One of the women noted that Beth's approach was too aggressive for her. A long-term relationship with Elizabeth did not gel with her more placid and agreeable temperament. Elizabeth was hired by the government of Geraldton, a small town northeast of Thunder Bay, Ontario. Geraldton is located in a rural area and is very isolated, which was uncomfortable for her. She returned to southern Ontario to work at the Christian Horizons group home. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was hired by Crescent Care in 2007. She was able to obtain this position despite some blemishes on her professional record. In 1995, she was hospitalized when she was found, quote, dazed and disoriented at work, end quote. It turned out the source of this was the side effects of her use of lorazepam, a drug that is used to treat anxiety and sleep disorders. The incident was reported to the Ontario College of Nurses. They determined that it was not Wettlaufer's intent to harm patients, and they recommended that she seek treatment. She may not have lost her license to practice, but she was fired from the hospital where she was working at the time. In 1996, the Ontario College of Nurses placed Wettlaufer's license under restriction. She could still practice nursing, but only under certain conditions. For one, she was required to work under the supervision of an addiction specialist and a general practitioner. She also had to attend support meetings, submit urine samples regularly, and abstain from drugs and alcohol in toto. In 1998, the Ontario College of Nurses was satisfied that Elizabeth Wettlaufer's trouble with drug abuse was a thing of the past, and they removed the restrictions from her license. No further violations came to light before she was hired by Crescent Care. One of Elizabeth's patients at Crescent Care was a woman by the name of Clotilda Adriano. She was 87 years old. She was a widow. She was ill and unhappy, with visits by her grandchildren as the only joy left in her life. Despite or in spite of her religious upbringing, Elizabeth became a heavy drinker once again. She was especially fond of hard liquor, with rye being a favorite. She drank it in triple shots. She had also become a thief. She frequently stole hydromorphone from patients. She would work while high on the drug. Having learned the ins and outs of the Crescent Care workplace culture, Wettlaufer discovered that the staff and administration did not monitor the supply of insulin. Clotilda Adriano was not a diabetic, but Elizabeth Wettlaufer wondered what would happen if she was injected with insulin. A nurse should know that if someone with homeostatic blood sugar is injected with insulin, especially a high dosage, their blood sugar will plummet and they will go into a coma. If the recipient does not receive urgent medical attention immediately, the consequences could prove fatal. The inventor of insulin was a Canadian man named Frederick Banting, who was born in Alliston, Ontario. He chose not to patent insulin, wishing that people across the world would be treated and cured at minimal expense. He continued to earn an income as a practitioner and researcher. He would likely have been appalled to learn of how Elizabeth Wettlaufer had been applying his invention. She injected Clotilda Adriano with insulin several times, but Clotilda did not die. She passed away at the age of 88 on July 30th, 2008. Her death was not attributed to an overdose of insulin. For Elizabeth Wettlaufer, this was a watershed moment. Nobody could prove that the complications of perilously low blood sugar contributed to Clotilda's demise. Wettlaufer took note of this for future reference. Clotilda Adriano's sister Albina de Medeiros was also a resident of Crescent Care. Wettlaufer administered overdoses of insulin to Albina. Albina died at Woodstock General Hospital on February 25, 2010. She was 91 years old. None of the medical staff at the hospital determined that her death was caused by a coma induced by an overdose of insulin. Wettlaufer made a mission out of her brand of euthanasia. However justified she felt these actions were, she kept this practice a secret from other staff and patients. Not only did they not discover what she was doing, but that she didn't tell her own confidants what she was up to. Now that she was getting away with murder, it was full steam ahead. James Silcox, 84 years old, was a veteran of World War II. He later worked for decades for a company called Standard Tube. His retirement was not a happy time, since he began to experience several debilitating complications of his deteriorating health. He was placed in Crescent Care after examinations and diagnoses at Woodstock General Hospital. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was James Silcox's attendant nurse. Residents of nursing homes can often be difficult and temperamental. James Silcox was diagnosed with dementia. Common psychological symptoms of dementia include mood swings, irritability, depression, anxiety, and decreased motivation. James's record of military service to Canada meant nothing to Elizabeth. It is unknown what exactly provoked Wettlaufer's wrath and resentment, but she was hell-bent on retaliating. August 10th, 2007, 9:30 p.m. Elizabeth Wettlaufer injected James Silcox with an overdose of insulin. He did not resist the procedure, and he did not react. Later that evening, he started shouting, "I love you! I love you!" He was calling out to his wife Agnes, who was still alive and living independently at their house. James passed away the next day. Attendant physicians adjudged the cause of death to be an embolism. Silcox had undergone surgery on his hip, and the risk of an embolism entering the bloodstream is always in the realm of possibility during such a procedure. Whenever a patient dies in a nursing home, their nurse is required to fill out a form. There is a box to check if the nurse believes the patient did not die from natural causes. Avoiding culpability was as easy as leaving that box unchecked. When James Silcox's relatives came to the facility after his death, they thanked Elizabeth Wettlaufer for her care. James's youngest daughter, Andrea, found the circumstances surrounding her father's death suspicious. He may have had a broken hip, but his health was otherwise robust for a man his age. The family requested a full autopsy from the Oxford County coroner. He dissuaded them from pursuing it, feeling that because he was 85 years old and a resident of an assisted living facility, it would be redundant. Because of this, the insulin overdose went undetected. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was on a roll. Maurice Moe Granite was from Tillsonburg, Ontario, and was a retired auto mechanic. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was his nurse, and she found his behavior hard to tolerate. She saw him as a problem, and her solution was effective and irreversible. December 22nd, 2007. Wettlaufer told Moe that his doctor recommended an injection of vitamins. He accepted the injection without complaint. Elizabeth Wettlaufer's Christmas present to him was an overdose of insulin. He died the next day. Friends of his were planning on bringing him home for the holidays. Wettlaufer worried that the injection site would be found. Had that occurred, an investigation would have been instigated. No physiological evidence and no tampering with paperwork was discovered. Scot-free so far. Michael Priddle was 63 years old, young for admittance to a nursing home. He was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, an inherited affliction that gradually breaks down the brain's nerve cells. The disease left him severely incapacitated and vulnerable to injury. By the time he was brought to Crescent Care, his physical autonomy was reduced to such a degree that he experienced difficulty with swallowing and was always at risk of choking. A safety belt kept him from sliding out of his wheelchair. A second mattress was laid out by his bed to prevent injury in the event of a fall. Michael Priddle received care from Elizabeth Wettlaufer. She surmised, as anybody would, that there was no way he could enjoy life in that condition. She decided to relieve him of his suffering by injecting him with a large dosage of insulin. The amount of insulin had the potential to kill him, but he survived. He didn't pass away until late in 2008. With a nurse like Elizabeth Wettlaufer looking after you, you needed luck on your side. Wayne Hedges was from Tillsonburg, Ontario. His stay at Crescent Care began in 2000. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was his personal nurse. He was a diabetic and could be difficult to deal with at times. Wettlaufer injected him with a large dose of insulin. Like Mike Priddle, Wayne Hedges survived. I myself am a diabetic. I take 60 units of insulin twice a day. It would be deadly if I weren't in the process of bringing down high blood sugar levels. It is possible that Wayne Hedges' blood sugar was high at the time, and the insulin's impact was more medicinal than destructive. Wayne Hedges died on January 24th, 2009. He was 57 years old. The conditions of his demise did not appear to be suspicious, so he was adjudged to have died of natural causes. That year, a 17-year-old girl began working at Crescent Care as a nurse's aide. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was attracted to her. She began taking her out on the town in Toronto, dining in fine restaurants, and plying her with alcohol. On one occasion, during a conversation, Elizabeth confided that people were dying during her shifts. She also intimated that she had done harm to patients by dispensing insulin in inappropriately large quantities. The nurse's aide told Wettlaufer she felt she should inform the police about what Wettlaufer was doing. Elizabeth told the girl nobody would believe her because there was no evidence. She also told her she would deny the allegations. As far as the impact on her conscience went, she told the girl that she had found God and God forgave her. Whatever the girl thought about this at the time, it sufficed enough that she didn't report Wettlaufer's actions to the authorities. Elizabeth Wettlaufer's relations with the nurse's aide were not long-lasting. She found somebody else, a woman 10 years older. According to Wettlaufer's neighbors, Elizabeth was very pushy with their girlfriend, and they fought on a regular basis. They did go on a trip to Niagara Falls, which left their relations greatly improved. In better spirits now, Wettlaufer was in the mood for killings, merciful or not. Gladys Millard was 92 years old at the time she received care from Elizabeth Wettlaufer. She was born in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, on October 11th, 1924. She suffered from diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. She could be demanding and stubborn. On occasion, she would refuse to eat or take her medications. One time she tried to strike a male caregiver. Elizabeth Wettlaufer decided that Gladys's time on this planet was up. On October 13th, 2011, she injected her with an excessive dose of insulin. As Wettlaufer drove home at the end of her shift, she was cackling to herself. From personal experience, I know the effects of a hypoglycemic incident, which occurs when blood sugar levels are too low. You break into a cold sweat, you become lightheaded, and you tremble. The nurse who cared for Gladys Millard after Wettlaufer's departure found her to be sweaty and incoherent. She notified a physician. Gladys Millard passed away the following day, surrounded by relatives. Elizabeth Wettlaufer began writing poetry and posting it at allpoetry.com. Her username was Betty Weston, though the words were copyrighted under the name Beth Wettlaufer. This entry was less like a poem and more like an op-ed piece. Maybe it's the rye, or the time of night, but my day was not so bad, filled with work and satisfaction and old people. See, I work with old people and I love their candidacy, their points, their wrinkles, their frailties, their refusing to eat anything but ice cream, even their smell. I love the finality, the resignation, the knowing this is their last home. Yes, sometimes I feel angry, but mostly at the staff. The people expected to meet the aging needs. I want to see everyone happy, everyone content, and when others who are paid to do so don't, well, I boil over. Come on, these people are paying to be here to end their days in a beige diapered wasteland. Tonight, though, there is not even a simmer. Everyone is in bed. Everyone is content. Every tooth soaking. Every diaper done up. Every pad in place. So I am content. My happiness slides into place, like the catheter I put in tonight, and my soul vents itself, like the healthy urine collecting in the bag. This is a poem she wrote called Inevitable. She watches some life drain from the notch in his neck vein. As it soothingly pools, it smothers her pain. Sweet stiletto, so sharp, craves another cut. Obeying a call, she moves to his gut. Blade traces a line from navel to spine, grafting on rib bones, slicing intestine. Her knife sings a love song to the splattering gore, slicing through breastbone, romancing some more. Heart beats, then sprays, as this next victim pays her deft dagger's bill. Does it quench her craze? Sharp thirst recedes as she dances in blood, satiated for now, no longer a flood. The macabre waltz ended her desire, has been tended by drinking the death brew that her passion blended. All others are safe from obsessions, greed, until she hears again from her knife and her need. The website provides comment sections for all postings. A user praised Wettlaufer's choice to make the murderer a woman. Wettlaufer responded by saying, "I felt it would make it more sinister to have the killer be a woman, as it is unexpected. It also made me feel powerful." Helen Matheson was 95 years old, and symptoms of Alzheimer's had begun to manifest. She received care directly from Elizabeth Wettlaufer. Helen was remembered as lucid in spite of the onset of her affliction. There was a quiet determination. Speculation had it that she accepted death as not only inevitable, but that she identified few, if any, incentives to remain alive. She was a broken-hearted woman, having not only been a widow, but her son and a grandson also died. Elizabeth Wettlaufer decided that not only was there no valid reason for the woman to stay alive, but that the most compassionate act she could commit for Helen's sake was to relieve her of her suffering by adopting the role of Grim Reaper in her own right. Not only was Helen not a diabetic, but she was keen to eat all the blueberry pie and ice cream she could get her hands on. It was one of the only pleasures she had to look forward to at that point. On October 25th, 2011, Wettlaufer drove to Walmart on her break and brought these items to Helen, as they were not featured as part of the institution's menu, not with the dietary restrictions prescribed by physicians. Helen greatly enjoyed these treats, and her gratitude was commensurate. That night, Wettlaufer informed Helen that she was to receive an injection. Helen was agreeable, trusting that the substance being injected was for her benefit. It was an overdose of insulin. This time Wettlaufer didn't wait until she was in her car to laugh about it. She giggled silently to herself. as if the whole thing were just a morbid practical joke. Helen's pulse accelerated. She had seizures. She became unconscious. She died the next day. Neighbors of Elizabeth Wettlaufer had reported that the normally aggressive woman came across as troubled at that time. She was unsettled about the deaths of Crescent Care residents. This would not normally be demonstrated by the staff of a nursing home, since they typically resign themselves to the fact that their charges are not long for this earth. Sometimes bonds between staff and residents are formed, and it can be painful for some staff when patients pass away. It is an occupational hazard they have to accept in order to remain stoic as they attend to their duties. It was clear to her neighbors that Elizabeth wasn't coping so well with this unfortunate pitfall of her profession. When one neighbor asked, "How did this person die?" Wettlaufer said, "I'm not sure." It would be a while before neighbors learned of the horrifying details Elizabeth kept to herself that day. Mary Zurowinski was 96 years old and in relative good health, considering her age. Her husband and all but one of her sons had passed away, but she managed to enjoy relationships with staff and fellow residents. She was remembered as feisty, outspoken, and fun. She was grateful for every day she had left to live. She still took care with her appearance by wearing makeup. She wanted to live to be 100 and was optimistic that she would reach that milestone. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was one of her nurses, and she felt Mary had been alive long enough. She injected Mary with a large dose of insulin, plus a drug that added additional impact to the injection. Wettlaufer informed her the injection was for pain. Pain and distress made Mary Zurowinski's last few days a travail following the injection. She died on November 7, 2011. Wettlaufer left an end-of-life care note on Mary's chart that went, "Mary was sitting at dining room table at 4:55 p.m. and was very pale. She started breathing in soft gasps, 30 per minute. She asked staff to put her back to bed, quote, 'so I can die there,' end quote. She was taken to the palliative room and put to bed. She then asked for someone to pray with her. PSWOR said Hail Mary with her, and Mary visibly relaxed. Son has been called. Nobody suspected foul play, and Elizabeth Wettlaufer was free to kill again." Still jubilant from her last murder, Elizabeth and her girlfriend went on a cruise to the tropics. Her neighbors recalled that she was in a good mood, magnanimous to all. It was a welcome relief from her normally forceful approach to interpersonal relations. Throughout the cruise, she enjoyed herself, though she also reflected on her actions of late, particularly germane to the euthanasia to which she took the liberty of carrying out. When she returned to Canada, she was no longer laughing about what she had done. She became confused. Her inclination to end their lives, instead of just ending or managing their suffering, lost its appeal. She was still a Christian and had not forgotten the 5th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." She would read her Bible occasionally and would attend church. When she prayed, she would tell God she didn't believe He would want her to help old people die. Considering that none of them asked her to help them die, the word help in this context was a misnomer. Her dark secret was safe with God and God only. The normally verbose woman told nobody about what she had done, not even her girlfriend. The secret was suppressed, but her homicidal urges were not so easily denied. Helen Young was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1923. She served in the Royal Air Force during World War II and afterwards. She was a so-called war bride, following Canadian Peter Young to his native land. They lived in Alberta at first, but later settled in Woodstock, Ontario in 1971. Peter died in 1988. Helen wasn't done living life to the fullest, and her lifestyle for the next few years was described by intimates as adventurous. Helen was diagnosed with diabetes, and the complications rendered it impossible for her to live unassisted. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was assigned to her care. She found Helen difficult to deal with. She was unhappy about living in the home. Wettlaufer decided that the conclusion of Helen's life was overdue, and she took it upon herself to bring about what she considered to be the woman's timely demise. Elizabeth injected Helen with a lethal dose of insulin. Helen's blood sugar levels must have been high at the time, because she did not react to the injection as intended. When Wettlaufer observed this, she returned and injected her with an identical amount of insulin. This time Helen reacted with consequences that were to Elizabeth Wettlaufer's satisfaction. She had a grand mal seizure. Wettlaufer calmly examined her, taking her vitals and submitting a report that consisted of nothing that indicated that anything was unusual about her blood sugar. Helen died a few days later at the age of 91. Wettlaufer was not around when this transpired, but she did meet with the woman's niece, who cried on her shoulder. She thanked Wettlaufer for her care. A quote from Helen's obituary. Her niece, Sharon, would like to thank the caring and patient staff of Crescent Care Nursing Home, whose consistent attempts to make Helen comfortable right up until her last days were greatly appreciated. Neither Sharon nor Crescent Care or physicians suspected that there was anything unusual about Helen's death. Helen was buried along with the truth about her departure. Elizabeth's substance abuse became a serious problem again. She drank regularly, with triple shots of rye as a favorite, with some Baileys thrown in at times. She found it more difficult than ever to keep her ghastly secret. She began to confess. On October 18, 2013, she told a pastor and his wife that she had been killing patients. They did not believe her, nor did they report her confession to police. All they did was pray with her. Mary Pickering was a native and resident of Tillsonburg, Ontario, before she began her stay at Crescent Care when symptoms of Alzheimer's began to appear. She was 78 years old and a widow. She had no children, but close friends assisted her with her care and personal matters. Mary's behavior was trying for the staff, and Elizabeth Wettlaufer resented her. She injected Mary with a pernicious amount of insulin. It killed her as expected, and Elizabeth Wettlaufer laughed when she heard the news. The amusement was short-lived. On March 31st, 2014, a letter was addressed to Elizabeth Wettlaufer from Brenda Van Quatham, the administrator of Crescent Care. The letter went as follows. On March 26, 2014, I became aware of a serious situation involving resident HD. Upon investigation, it became apparent that you had administered the wrong medication. Instead of giving her the medication that had been prescribed to her, that was prescribed to another resident. This then resulted in her being incorrectly medicated and over-medicated as well. The resident experienced distress as a result of this. At our meeting, you acknowledged that this was an error on your part and explained that it was inadvertent. Beth, although you have acknowledged this latest error, this is another incident in a pattern of behaviors that are placing residents at risk. You have an extensive disciplinary record for medication-related errors, which includes numerous warnings, as well as 1, 3, and 2 5-day suspensions. As a result of this most recent occurrence, The termination of your employment is warranted. Please be advised that your employment is terminated effective immediately. Other documents filed indicated that Wettlaufer was terminated for, quote, failing to follow insulin protocol. In the event that a nurse's conduct puts patients at risk in the province of Ontario, the College of Nurses is consulted. If the consultation took place, there is no record of a disciplinary hearing. A hearing was not held after her 4 suspensions either. Had that occurred, the Ontario Nurses Association would have attended to the matter. Elizabeth Wettlaufer may have been fired, but the deaths of James Silcox, Maurice Granite, Gladys Millard, Helen Matheson, Mary Zerwinski, Helen Young, and Mary Pickering were not considered to be instigated by the actions of Wettlaufer. She lost her job, but not her freedom. A long-term care facility in London, Ontario, called Meadow Park, was in the market for a nurse, and they contacted Elizabeth Wettlaufer. Though her misuse of insulin and the consequences to her position at Crescent Care were documented, it did not impede her chances of obtaining employment. Elizabeth was delighted and relieved to be working again. Arpad Art Horvath was born in Oslo, Iskos, Hungary, on November 14, 1938. He fled Hungary and settled in Canada to escape the Soviet invasion. He served as chief engineer and owner of Central Tool and Die in London, Ontario, for 50 years. His hobby was big game hunting, and he was president of London's Hungarian Club for 29 years. He became disabled later in life and required full-time care at the age of 75. This was when he began living at Meadow Park. He could be ornery, and Elizabeth Wettlaufer disliked him. He became the latest name on her hit list. As at Crescent Care, the insulin supply at Meadow Park was not subjected to documented inventory inspections. Wettlaufer stole some insulin, and she was not suspected of having done so, nor was anybody else. When Elizabeth approached Art with the injection, he was not cooperative. She said, "Take your medicine." She managed to persuade him on the second attempt. She injected an unwarranted and excessive amount of insulin into his arm. Insulin is customarily injected into the stomach or thighs. Arpad died a few days later on August 31st, 2014. Arpad was survived by his wife, children, and grandchildren. Nobody suspected Elizabeth Wettlaufer or the insulin of having brought about his demise. Next year on Father's Day, Wettlaufer wrote in an online posting, "Father's Day is a great reminder of how blessed I am to still have my dad alive and able to spend time with me." In 2014, Wettlaufer implied to her Narcotics Anonymous sponsor that she was responsible for 8 murders of people she would not name. The sponsor assumed she was a pathological liar, so she did not report this confession to the police. Elizabeth met with an attorney and told him what she had done. He told her to keep the information to herself and seek treatment from mental health professionals. It is unknown whether or not she pursued treatment. After working at Meadow Park for a time, Wettlaufer decided to move on. She was accepted by the Lifeguard and St. Elizabeth agencies, which placed nurses in private residences and nursing homes. One such nursing home was Telfer Place in Paris, Ontario. It was once voted the prettiest town in Canada. That must have been before Elizabeth Wettlaufer started working there. One resident of Telfer Place was 77-year-old Sandra Toller. She was suffering from symptoms of dementia. Her family tried to provide her care, but her condition got worse, and required the full-time attention of medical professionals. September 2015. Elizabeth was assigned to the care of Sandy Toller. Despite the effects of her disease on her temperament, Sandy was remembered as having a pleasant demeanor and a good sense of humor. Wettlaufer was not sufficiently charmed by Sandy to spare her life. She administered a deadly dose of insulin to her. Sandra had good timing working in her favor. Another nurse noticed that Sandy was sweating profusely. She tested her blood sugar and found that it was perilously low. She gave her something sweet and saved her life. This incident was not traced back to Elizabeth Wettlaufer, who was laughing when she heard about it. She may not have succeeded in her efforts to dispatch Sandra Toller to the grave, but it didn't deter her from adding more residents to her body count. August 2016. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was assigned to care for a patient at a private residence in Oxford County, Ontario. Beverly Bertram, 68 years old, was a diabetic. Beverly's blood sugar must have been at a high level at the time, for when Wettlaufer injected her with a large dose of insulin, laughing as she did so, Beverly's blood sugar dipped low enough to deplete her energy levels and make her drowsy. The excessive dosage of insulin proved to be more effective as a sleep aid than an execution method. St. Elizabeth Healthcare decided to dispatch Wettlaufer to the town of Ingersoll, where she would work with diabetic children at a school. She got cold feet by this prospect and resigned. Wettlaufer returned to Woodstock. She considered telling her parents about the murders and her recent unemployment, but they had guests from Scotland, so she nixed that idea. She was unsure what to do with her life next. September 8th, 2016. Wettlaufer ran a Google search, entering the names of all her murder victims. All she came across were obituaries. 6 days later, she Googled the questions, "How long and painful is insulin overdose death?" and "What happens to the person in this case?" September 16th, 2016. It was 2 days after Elizabeth Wettlaufer read several true crime articles online about nurses who had murdered patients. She admitted herself to CAMH, or the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, in Toronto. As CAMH is fond of boasting, it is, quote, Canada's largest mental health and addiction teaching hospital and one of the world's leading research centers in this field, end quote. When I went to CAMH with a mental health crisis of my own, they were not helpful, and I have been told something similar by other people who sought treatment there. Anyway, Wettlaufer checked herself into CAMH's emergency department. She told them she was struggling with depression, drug use, suicidal ideation, and guilt. She told one doctor she was overdosing her charges as a nurse with insulin for the previous 10 years. She said her actions may have caused as many as 8 deaths. She also mentioned the attempts that failed. CAMH diagnosed this as, quote, very concerning, end quote, and admitted her to the women's unit. A CAMH psychiatrist assessed her as being a risk to herself and others. He placed her on Form 3, which is a legal document issued in Canada that legally authorizes the detention of an individual who has not committed a violent crime, but is at risk of doing so because of a mental illness. This kept her housed in the unit. Her stay was later extended until CAMH deemed it safe to release her back into the community. She also received medical attention for high blood pressure. Psychiatric nurse Michelle DeSanti interviewed Wettlaufer to get to the bottom of her motivation to overdose her patients. Wettlaufer was eager to discuss these matters. One Dr. Kahn suggested that Wettlaufer put it in writing. On September 24th, she wrote the following. September 2007. James Silcox, Crescent Care. Not a diabetic. Had dementia. James was known for inappropriately touching the staff. He was also known for saying that his wife was a big whore and was going to fuck all of Woodstock. James was not a diabetic. That evening I got the urge to overdose James. I was angry that he was so inappropriate. At approximately 9:30 p.m., I decided to overdose him with insulin, hoping he would die. I felt it was his time to go because of the way he acted. I remember feeling angry at him. I went into the med room and used a spare insulin needle to prepare a dose of 50 units of short-acting insulin. I gave it to him at approximately 10:30 p.m. Throughout the night, after I overdosed him, James called out, "I'm sorry," and "I love you." At 3:30 a.m., the PSWs found James' vital signs absent. I called the attending physician and James' family to inform them of James' death. The physician ruled his cause of death to be a post-surgery embolism. September or October 2007, Maurice Granite, Crescent Care. Not a diabetic, a cancer patient. I was told by one of the nurses that Maurice had a bad habit of grabbing the staff's breasts and asses. One afternoon I was working and I felt angry. I gave Maurice approximately 40 units of short-acting insulin at around 8 p.m. By the next morning, he was in a coma. He died sometime that afternoon. October 2011, Helen Matheson, not a diabetic, Crescent Care, dementia. Helen was very quiet and reserved. One afternoon I gave her an overdose of insulin. It was approximately 50 units of short-acting insulin. I'm not sure why I chose her. I was feeling angry and frustrated about my job. After the overdose, she stopped talking and eating. The doctor declared her to be palliative. She died 2 days later. November 2011, Mary Zerwinski, not a diabetic, Crescent Care, dementia. Mary was spunky, thin, and outspoken. One afternoon around 4 p.m., I gave her 50 units of short-acting insulin and 30 units of long-acting insulin. She bugged me because she was outspoken and resistive to care. I was feeling very angry in general. She died the next afternoon. November 2011, Gladys Millard, type 2 diabetic, Crescent Care, dementia. Gladys had severe dementia and no longer talked. She was very stubborn and horribly difficult to give pills to. I was working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. At around 5 a.m., I gave her 40 units of long-acting insulin and 60 units of short-acting insulin. At approximately 7 a.m., she became unresponsive and diaphoretic. She died that evening. October 2013, Helen Young, Crescent Care, type 3 diabetic, dementia. Helen was feisty and outspoken. She was constantly saying, "Help me, nurse." She frequently yelled out, "I want to die." One afternoon I felt like something snapped inside me. She kept yelling out she wanted to die. I thought angrily, "Fine, I'll help you die." I gave her 60 units of short-acting insulin just before supper. After supper, I gave her 60 units of long-acting insulin. At approximately 8 p.m., the PSWs called me to her room. Helen was having a seizure. She was not epileptic. I took all her vital signs and pretended to take her blood sugar. She died 2 days later. March 2014, Maureen Pickering, Crescent Care, dementia, not diabetic. Maureen had a lot of behaviors. She would hit other residents or pull their hair. She was on one-to-one care. We didn't always have the needed staff for this. Sometimes I had to be with her one-on-one as well as give pills to 32 people, do paperwork, and do treatments. One afternoon shift we did not have her one-to-one staff. I was angry, frustrated, and irritated. She kept yelling out random things. After supper, I gave her a Haldol shot to calm her down. Then I got the idea that if I could cause her some brain damage, she wouldn't be such a handful. At approximately 8 p.m., I gave her 80 units of long-acting insulin. That night she had a stroke. She was sent to hospital where she became comatose. She died approximately 5 days later. August 2014, Meadow Park Nursing Home. Arpod Art Horvath, dementia, not diabetic. Art was physically abusive to the staff. He would pinch and hit. One evening I decided enough was enough. I felt angry, frustrated, vindictive, and energized. I gave Art 80 units of short-acting insulin and 60 of long-acting insulin at approximately 8 p.m. During the night he had a stroke and died 4 to 5 days later. People who didn't die: Clotilda Adriano, dementia, diabetic, Crescent Care, September 2007. Albina de Medeiros, diabetic, Crescent Care, October 2007. Wayne, dementia, diabetic, Crescent Care, October 2008. Mike, Huntington's disease. 2009, Sandra Toller, Telfer Place, Paris. Winter 2006, gave her 80 units of long-acting insulin, 60 units of short-acting. Survived, Beverly, diabetic, August 2016. St. Elizabeth, Ingersoll, home care, gave 180 units long-acting insulin via PICC line, survived. Wettlaufer also told them about her personal life and history in detail. CAMH staff determined that she exhibited traits of borderline personality disorder, mood instability, impulsivity, fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, and anger. They also identified patterns consistent with antisocial personality disorder. In other words, they diagnosed her as a sociopath. Her behavior as an adolescent was indicative of conduct disorder. One day, Elizabeth told an evening nurse that Dr. Kahn authorized 15-minute unaccompanied passes for her so that she could leave the unit and get some, quote, fresh air and coffee, end quote. It was a lie, so Wettlaufer's deceptive, conniving ways were alive and well. She told another nurse that she considered changing the patient name tags on the medicine cart as a prank on the nurses. She never did, but CAMH staff did not perceive this as light-hearted humor. Wettlaufer told many of her fellow patients that she might end up in prison. As a result, many of them felt anxious in her presence. She was abrasive with other women in the unit. She went out of her way to provoke heated exchanges with one particular female patient. As far as CAMH staff were concerned, her record of behavior during her residence there lent further credibility to her claim to have murdered nursing home patients. The following is a discharge document that was written about Wettlaufer. Elizabeth explained that she had difficulty dealing with the anxiety, irritation, and frustrations of both her personal and working life. While alcohol and opioids provided her with some relief from stress at times, she often could not find an adequate method to manage the building pressure. She explains that she started to intentionally overdose patients whom she was working with in order to relieve this stress. By giving vulnerable people a potentially lethal dose of insulin, she felt both more powerful and a release of this pressure. Sometimes she was angry at a particular patient and wanted them to die. At other times, she admitted that she was more indifferent and saw this individual as someone whom she could overdose without suspicion. She admitted at times that she had regret following the overdose, but was hoping that the patient would not, in fact, die. Despite this, she never intervened to prevent the death from hypoglycemia. She admitted that she never wanted to be caught and was thus very careful in the overdoses. She stated that over time she would get less satisfaction from providing the overdoses. She was very distraught and continued to do them, especially in 2016 when she states not having done this in nearly 1.5 years. Elizabeth Wettlaufer claimed that she was turning back to God. She did not report this to CAMH doctors. Dr. Kahn was legally mandated to report her confession about the murders to police. He spoke with Detective Sergeant Heather Nichols from Toronto's 52 Division. Detectives K. Hamilton and P. Alberga went to CAMH and took a statement from Dr. Kahn. Wettlaufer also gave a statement to police, which was recorded. She was very anxious about it, but the police were respectful throughout the process, which put her at ease somewhat. CAMH faxed Wettlaufer's 4-page handwritten confession to the police in the Ontario College of Nurses. As Wettlaufer's stay was drawing to a close, CAMH staff observed that she was feeling optimistic, future-oriented, and free of suicidal and homicidal ideation. Most of her anxiety and remorse germane to the murders remain the, quote, impact the publicity of her actions will have on her family, along with the families of the patients who died as a result of Elizabeth's actions, end quote. Detectives from Woodstock offered to drive her home from Toronto, and she accepted. October 5th, 2016. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was brought into Woodstock Police Headquarters for questioning. She was interviewed by Detective Constable Nathan Hergott of the Woodstock Crime Unit. The interview was recorded on audio and video. She was not under arrest and was advised that she could withdraw her cooperation and leave the station at any time. As it turned out, Wettlaufer was very eager to talk. Some highlights from the interview. Wettlaufer. I met a woman online, okay? And she decided to move to be with me. So I ended up quitting the job and I was going to Crescent Care to make a little more money because I was the only breadwinner. Hergott. How long did you work there? Wettlaufer. Till March 2014. She explained that she worked there for 7 years and worked all 5 wings. Wettlaufer. I was fired from Crescent Care for a medication error. From there I went to Meadow Park and left there to get help with an addiction issue. She explained that she left Meadow Park in September 2014 to work for the Lifeguard Nursing Agency, which connected her to contracts with Elizabeth Healthcare. Wettlaufer. You go into nursing homes, people's retirement homes, a lot of one-on-one with people. Hergott. That would be tough. Wettlaufer. It was okay. I knew they were going to die, and it was an opportunity to give the family a rest. I know the medications they get. It's going to be all right. Hergott. What was your addiction? Wettlaufer. Hydromorph. I was a binge user, okay? So I would use what I could get a hold of by stealing it from the patients. She explained that she substituted that drug with laxatives and would alter the records. Wettlaufer. Barney needed 2 of those today, and Billy needed 3 of those today, when they really didn't, okay? And that's how I would get a hold of it. She would also steal from a drug containment unit that resembled a safe. Wettlaufer. You picked it up and shook it and you would get drugs out of it. Hergott asked if the staff ever confronted her about the drugs and if the thefts went undetected. Wettlaufer. I put it in my bag and took it home, so I just played dumb. Hergott. Okay. Wettlaufer. When the police phoned about it, I played dumb. Hergott. How long did the addiction last? Wettlaufer. From 2008 to 2014. Then I got treatment. I started using again January 2015. Hergot. Still using? Wettlaufer. No, I have friends in the AA. I have a very clear plan, okay? And I also know if I'm not able to be out and about, that AA and Narcotics Anonymous do have some programs where they come into prisons. Absolutely. Hergot. Do you think it was just the stresses of the job that you were facing, or dealing with your personal life as well? Wettlaufer. I started feeling I had to be the best possible person. It was a very stressful job giving medications to 32 people. She mentioned she also supervised 4 personal support workers, PSWs, quote, who sometimes didn't get along with me, end quote. Wettlaufer. It's a hard job. I always was putting this pressure on myself to be a really good nurse and do everything perfectly. And every once in a while when I could get a hold of a hydromorph or 2 and take them, then that pressure was gone. She told Hergot she pursued treatment for addiction, which she described as being successful. After asking her questions about her personal life, like her marriage and her family, he asked her what led to her resignation from St. Elizabeth. Wettlaufer. That's where things get a little crazy. That is the part I haven't told the doctors, because it seems so stupid now. When my ex and I broke up in 2007, I was already taking medication for my borderline personality disorder. I was so angry, and it was like a voice said inside me, saying, I'll use you, don't worry about it. The different times I have caused people death or caused them discomfort through the insulin, I believe it was the influence of that voice, or whatever it was. It wasn't a voice in the head. It was in here, okay? Wettlaufer pointed to her midsection when she used the word here. Wettlaufer. And when I would do it, afterwards, I would hear like a laughter in my tummy, okay? And the way that, that I help people to die has been through insulin. After my first 30-day evaluation, my supervisor came to me and said, I'm really sorry. We wanted you for Woodstock, but we have so many kids in schools in Ingersoll that need help with their insulin pumps that you're going to start working in Ingersoll, okay? I panicked. I didn't want to do that, okay? Because I felt, what if those are kids? She explained that this was what motivated her to resign. Wettlaufer. I packed my stuff in the car and drove 2 days into Quebec, thinking like I would just sort of run away, sort of thing. And then I thought, that's just stupid. And I came back. My parents, they had visitors from Scotland, so I didn't tell them. Wettlaufer laughed. Wettlaufer. I spent 2 weeks pretending to go to work, okay? It's funny, but it's not funny. Once they left, I decided I didn't want to nurse anymore. I didn't want to hurt anybody anymore. So, I also quit my other job, and then I did a lot of looking into how I could get help, because I realized I needed help with whatever this was. Because part of me started to believe it was the devil, and part of me thought it was God. She explained that she didn't tell the doctors at CAMH about her belief that her mind was a battleground, facilitating skirmishes between God and Satan. Later. Hergot. I admire the way you're conducting yourself. I'm not here to judge, and I'm far from a doctor. I appreciate you telling me the truth. Wettlaufer intimated that she had been, quote, stewing, end quote, over some matters. Wettlaufer. Do I give the names of the people I killed? The family thought the family member wanted them to die peacefully and normally, and they didn't. Later. Wettlaufer told Hergot she had a long list of victims. Hergot. You and I can get through it together, and as long as you're patient with me, I've got all the time in the world. I'm not going anywhere. Hergot mentioned James Silcox. Wettlaufer. The first one to die as a result of what I did. There were other people I had done it to that didn't die. The conversation shifted to the death of Clotilda Adriano. Wettlaufer. I didn't really want her to die. I was just angry and had this sense inside me that maybe this person God wanted back with him. Hergot. You didn't tell Dr. Kahn? Wettlaufer. I didn't tell him it was the person God wants. It sounds so stupid. Dr. Kahn kept asking if God wanted me for a special purpose. I had a sense after my marriage broke up that God was going to use me for something. In the aftermath, she wondered, quote, was it God or the devil fooling me, end quote. Hergot. Did you feel like you were doing the right thing for these people? Wettlaufer. No. I felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do, okay? But it wasn't what was right for them. Hergot steered the conversation back to the case of James Silcox. Wettlaufer. He wasn't always my patient. He would grab nurses' breasts and buttocks, and the nurse said he had once touched her inappropriately. He also, quote, said inappropriate things about his wife, charging that now he was in care, his wife was going to, quote, fuck, end quote, all of Woodstock. I used a borrowed insulin pen, borrowed insulin, and gave him an insulin shot at 3:30. He was yelling, I love you. At 3:30 he was gone. I did what I was supposed to do. I called the doctor and the family. The doctor said the cause of death was due to something with embolism from hip surgery, not insulin. Hergot. Who do you think he was talking to when he yelled out, I love you? Wettlaufer. His family. Hergot. Did the family commend you for the work you had done? Wettlaufer said they had. Hergot asked Elizabeth how it made her feel. Wettlaufer. Awful. Yeah, absolutely awful. Hergot. How did you deal with it? Wettlaufer. I fought with my girlfriend, okay? I did some exercising, played some games on the computer, and just tried to forget about it. Hergot. Did you have a problem sleeping that night at all? Wettlaufer. I would say I tossed and turned a bit, yeah, okay? I felt pretty bad, and I didn't want to see the family again, so I tried to make sure I wasn't working when they came to pick up his stuff. Hergot. Where did you get the insulin? Wettlaufer. From the fridge in the medication room. She said they were also, quote, extras in the drawer, end quote. She also said the institution didn't take inventory of the insulin, and every patient had their own individually prescribed supply. Hergot. Where did you inject him? Wettlaufer. I'm not really sure. In the arm or torso. He did not react. Wettlaufer recalled that, quote, his wife and daughter loved him a lot, end quote, and, quote, he could be a handful, end quote. His death, quote, made me feel crappy, horrible, end quote, but there was, quote, nothing else I can remember, end quote, from, quote, 9 years ago, end quote. She mentioned separating from her husband in January 2007, and, quote, by that time I was in a new relationship with a woman, end quote. She identified her by the name of Maureen. Hergot. Ever exposed to her what you were doing? Wettlaufer. No, absolutely not. Wettlaufer said she was the, quote, charge nurse, end quote, and outlined the duties required of her in that position. Wettlaufer farted. Wettlaufer. Sorry, I'm gonna pass gas eventually. Hergot. That's fine, don't worry about it. Wettlaufer told Hergot James Silcox was not a nice man. He asked her if a disagreeable disposition was common among her victims. Wettlaufer. That might be, but I just I had a feeling inside, feeling that they were the ones. Hergot. spur of the moment. Wettlaufer explained that she considered injecting Silcox at 6 p.m., indicating that it was not done on momentary impulse. With a disposition that came across as flippant, Wettlaufer described the process of post-mortem activities, which included listening for a heartbeat, filling out forms, and notifying next of kin. Hergott asked her if she checked the box for the coroner so he could examine the body for any cause of death that might not have been brought about by illness or old age. Wettlaufer: I couldn't check that one. I skipped that part of the form. I did feel a relief and a release of pressure. The next patient discussed was Maurice Granite. Wettlaufer: He was another one who liked to grab breasts. She said she had heard about this behavior from other nurses. Wettlaufer: I got that feeling inside that this was his time to go. So I gave him the overdose after supper, and I believe he died the next day. He died when I wasn't there. I told him, the doctor wants you to have a vitamin shot. He did not question the vitamin shot. Hergott asked her if she had any concerns about checking the boxes on the forms. Wettlaufer: I always wondered if they would find the spot where I gave the shot and there would be an investigation. Other than that, no. She said she injected him in the leg because he didn't have a lot of body fat. Wettlaufer: There were people who loved him. He had friends, family. Hergott: How did you feel when Maurice passed away? Wettlaufer: I wasn't there when he passed away. I found out that he died. Wettlaufer said she found, quote, no flags, end quote, but told the constable, quote, I could not have altered the documents, end quote. She couldn't explain how Mo's death made her feel. She informed Hergott about the attempted murders that led up to the death of Helen Matheson. Wettlaufer: Helen was quiet, very determined. She seemed to be waiting to die. Again, I had that feeling she was the one. She was very lucid. She liked blueberry pie and ice cream. On my break, I went to Walmart and got her some blueberry pie and ice cream. Then that night, I overdosed her. Like I said, I had that feeling it was her time to go. The person to go now. After I did it, I got that laughter. After she was injected and after she passed away. Hergott asked her if she got along with Helen. Wettlaufer: She was very quiet. I got that feeling she was next a few times. She was near her end. After the injection, I tried to stay away. Sometimes I would go back to see what was happening. Hergott: Even though you tried to take their lives? Wettlaufer: Yeah. Hergott asked her what symptoms manifested in the victims after the injections. Wettlaufer: They get red, shake, lose consciousness, get seizures. 2 people stroked right out. 3 because James stroked out as well. Hergott moved on to the death of Mary Zurowinski. Wettlaufer: She was feisty, outspoken. She said, You know I'm going to die tonight. Get me into the deathbed so I can die. I thought, well, she must be the next one. I had that feeling inside of me that she must be the next one. So I gave her an overdose of insulin, and she died in a couple of days. Hergott: The next afternoon, another officer entered the room. He had 2 bottles of water. Wettlaufer said to him, Which one has the vodka in it? And laughed. Returning to the interview, she told Hergott about how she injected Mary not just with insulin, but with an additional drug to intensify the effects of the overdose. She mentioned that she lied to Mary, saying it was a pain reliever. Wettlaufer: She was fun. Okay, she must be the one. Hergott: We'll refer to her as your 4th victim, the 4th person that you were successful in using insulin injections. How did your emotions start to feel? Wettlaufer: I had a lot of guilt. After Mary, Gladys, then a period of 3 years where I didn't do it. I was trying very hard to get close to God. I was still using a little bit of alcohol. She laughed as she described to Hergot her habit of chugging triple rye whiskeys and Baileys, clarifying what, quote, a little bit of alcohol, end quote, actually meant. Hergot asked her if she struggled over the deaths. Wettlaufer: they all died peacefully. I am extremely sorry. Awful. Hergot: if you could say something. Wettlaufer: what can you say to them that would matter? I should have gotten out sooner. I took something from you that was precious, and it was taken too soon. I honestly believed at the time that God wanted me to do it, but I know now that was not true. If I could take it back and get help sooner. She said she was determined to, quote, take it to my grave and not tell anybody, end quote. That was before she spoke to the lawyer and got treatment near Welland. Hergot shifted gears, moving on to the murder of Gladys Millard. Wettlaufer: she was walking and talking, had quite the spirit. She once punched a man. Boom. Wettlaufer also described her as a stubborn woman with dementia who did not willingly eat or take her medications. Wettlaufer: one evening I felt this red surging feeling she was going to be the one. It always happened at work, never outside. It always happened at work. Wettlaufer said, the so-called red surge, quote, is what made me think it was God, okay? Which, I am so embarrassed. She did not mention the red surge to the staff at Cam H. Referring to the red surge, Hergot said, well, like I said, I'm not here to judge you. Wettlaufer: close to the end of the shift, I did it, and the next person called the doctor. Wettlaufer could not recall how much insulin she injected into Gladys. She just said it was, quote, easy to take the meds, end quote, since there were no cameras in the dispensary. Wettlaufer told Hergot that Gladys died the following day. Wettlaufer: when someone is dying, it seems like it takes longer than it does, if you know what I mean. Hergot asked her what was on her mind on her days off regarding the murders. Wettlaufer: I would wonder if she had died, if it would be the time I get caught. Every time I wondered if I would get caught. Hergot: consequences? Wettlaufer: fired, jail, no more nursing license. Wettlaufer had more to say about Gladys, who fought against the injection, pinching and scratching. Wettlaufer: you were next to go. Always that red surging I identified as God telling me this is how you work for me. Later on, I fought it, but pretty much I would go get insulin right after the feeling. In a cheerful tone of voice, Wettlaufer described Gladys's reaction to the injection. She said she was, quote, relaxed, then red. She was sweating. She was incoherent, end quote. She went on to say that she was providing care to 32 patients, and the stress of it all began to press upon her. She told Hergot what was going through her mind after she returned to Canada from the cruise in 2011. Wettlaufer: I felt damned, confused, and didn't want to do it anymore. Somehow, if I could connect with God, I wouldn't do it anymore. I was reading my Bible and praying. I had the odd urge to do it, but I resisted by going to church, reading my Bible, telling God I didn't believe He wanted me to do that anymore. The conversation shifted to the murder of Helen Young. Wettlaufer described her as, quote, feisty and outspoken, end quote. Wettlaufer: Helen was miserable and yelled she wanted to die. Wettlaufer said she was not happy about her life and was, quote, very difficult to deal with, end quote. She refused to eat and asked nurses to euthanize her. Elizabeth was the one nurse who decided to become Nurse Kevorkian and grant her wish. Wettlaufer: One night something snapped inside and I said, "Okay, you will die." That red surge came back and I gave her a shot, short acting. Then I gave her more. She had a seizure. Wettlaufer mentioned that she examined her vital signs and, quote, pretended to take her blood sugar, end quote, claiming to fellow staff that everything was normal. Wettlaufer, I was not there when she died. Hergot, you were successful in causing her death. How did it make you feel? Wettlaufer, I felt horrible. I had failed myself. I felt like God had failed me. I continued going to church. I was getting very confused. I told the pastor what happened, and he prayed over me. He had said, "Now this is God's grace, but if you do this again, we will have to turn you into the police." I told them I was taking people's lives. Not how many people, but that I had been doing it a long time. She mentioned Helen's niece, who loved Helen very much, and cried on Wettlaufer's shoulder and thanked her for being there. Wettlaufer said she felt, quote, guilt, shame, anger, had betrayed her. I was getting very confused. Was this God or was it not? End quote. Her God asked her about her other feelings. He also asked her if she could distinguish between right and wrong at the time. Wettlaufer, I knew the difference between right and wrong, but I felt that it was something God or whoever wanted me to do, but at that point I was starting to doubt that it was God. Hergot shifted the questioning to the subject of the murder of Maureen Pickering. Wettlaufer, Maureen was a handful. She attacked other patients, pulled hair, pinched. One night I started the surge again. I don't want her to die, but if I could somehow give her enough of a dose to give a coma, somehow change her brain waves, so she would not be so hard to handle. Wettlaufer said she, quote, overdosed her, end quote, with, quote, a lot, end quote, of insulin, quote, 80-something, end quote. As a daily user of insulin, I can tell you that an insulin pen holds 60 units. She would have had to empty a cartridge and then replace it with another to inject the additional 20 units. Hergot, why so much? Wettlaufer, I wasn't sure she would die or not. Wettlaufer said she injected it into Pickering's left arm. When Maureen asked what it was for, Wettlaufer told her it was a vitamin injection. She gave her another dose 90 minutes later. Wettlaufer, she stroked and died in a few days at the hospital. She said that, like with the others she killed, she laughed after committing the homicide. She still blamed her heavy workload for triggering her homicidal impulses. She said that when she told the administration of Meadow Park she was fired for medication errors, the interviewer said, I believe in second chances. You're hired. 1-year contract. Hergot asked about the murder of Arpad Horvath. Wettlaufer, he was mean. He would twist arms, punching. He fought the first needle. The second needle went in. She said the needle contained, quote, large amounts, end quote, of insulin she had stolen from the medication refrigerator undetected. She told Arpad to, quote, take your medicine, end quote, and injected him. He, quote, didn't stroke, end quote, but died days later at the hospital. Wettlaufer. The family was absolutely devastated. He had a daughter, a wife. They came to take stuff out of his room. She told Hergot she, quote, felt awful, end quote, and she, quote, betrayed them, end quote. After a bathroom break, presumably to relieve herself of more gas, Hergot asked her about her motivation to kill Arpad. Wettlaufer. It wasn't God. It was something wrong with me psychologically that was making me believe it was God. Writing it out helped me clarify that. She told Hergott she was willing to provide documentation on the people who survived her injections, like Clotilda and Albina Adriano, Wayne Hedges, Michael Priddle, Sandra Toller, and Beverly Bertram. It was always the same story about the so-called surging and how God appointed her as executioner for those patients. Hergott asked her how she felt as she carried out these botched homicides. Wettlaufer: awful. Hergott: a burden off your shoulders? Wettlaufer: yes, I've done the right thing. Hergott: do you feel a sense of relief? Wettlaufer: yes, and now I know that it wasn't God, and I'm ashamed of myself. I also think that it was mental health. I was not in my right mind. I was raised to believe in God, so how could I get such a strong feeling that this is what God wanted, unless there was something wrong with my head? Hergott: people will find out what happened to their loved ones. Wettlaufer: I feel horrible. If there was anything I could do to prevent it happening again, I would do it. Hergott asked her who she confessed to. She said that in 2008 she confessed to her girlfriend, who told her not to do it again or she would report it to the police. She said in 2011, quote, I told friends I had stopped killing, then I told my pastor. He said, this has to stop, end quote. She told a friend who lived in British Columbia, an attorney, and a cousin. She told someone she considered a friend who threatened to call the police. Of this, Wettlaufer said, I had already shared it. Why call the police? Hergott wanted to know why none of these people called the police. Wettlaufer: maybe they didn't believe me? Hergott: it's a pretty serious thing. Wettlaufer: it's the worst thing. Hergott asked her if there was evidence of her crimes in her home. She said she, quote, journaled on it, end quote, because of, quote, trying to figure out what was going on in my head, end quote. She said there might be some evidence in her computer and she was willing to share it with police. Hergott noticed she had a tattoo. He asked her what it symbolized. Wettlaufer: hopes and dreams. I have hopes for the future and dreams for the future. Hergott: what are your hopes now? Wettlaufer: some way I can help somebody. Maybe somebody who can't read. Maybe somebody can study me and come up with answers and new medications so this doesn't happen again. Hergott asked her if there was anything worse than taking a life. Wettlaufer: yes, child molestation. She said the reason she turned down the position to work with diabetic children was that she feared she might want to give them overdoses of insulin. Wettlaufer came to the realization that the interview was drawing to a close. With no prompting on Hergott's part, she self-assessed her performance, saying, I think I did pretty good. Once again, she repeated the same litany of excuses about how she was mentally ill and thought God wanted her to kill people. She opined that if she had been on the right medications, she might not have done it. This, despite having said earlier that she knew right from wrong at the time, and the killings were carefully planned and executed complete with a method to avoid detection. This is something a defense attorney would advise against, since it would undermine an insanity plea. Hergott did not give Wettlaufer a performance review. Hergott: we'll arrange to see what the next steps are. Wettlaufer: oh, okay. I might not be going home then? Hergott had enough incriminating data to arrest Wettlaufer on the spot. Still, he had to consult with his superior officers. He said to her, I will get back to you on that. Sit tight. October 6th, 2016. It was the day after the interview. Wettlaufer appeared before a judge. He did not place her in custody. He released her under a peace bond. She could go home, but under certain conditions. She could only live at her apartment or with her parents, both in Woodstock. She had a curfew requiring her to be at home between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. Exceptions would be made for Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Had police inspected her compliance, she was required to answer her door within 5 minutes. She could not leave Oxford County without notifying police at least 24 hours in advance, and she would have to provide them with a full itinerary. This was a quote from the police bond regarding possession of drugs, prescription or otherwise. Do not possess insulin, medications, or any drug as defined by the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, unless they are prescribed for you by a physician or over-the-counter medication for your own personal care. She was forbidden to provide service as a caregiver, neither for financial compensation nor on a voluntary basis to anyone. She was not to enter any nursing home, care facility, retirement home, or hospital, quote, except as necessary for your own personal health matters, end quote. She was required to continue with mental health treatment with her family physician and staff at CAMH. She was also disallowed from possessing and consuming alcohol. Relatives and other next of kin for the people Wettlaufer killed were notified that their loved ones did not die of natural causes, but were murdered by their nurse, Elizabeth Wettlaufer. They were outraged and devastated. October 24th, 2016. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was placed under arrest and charged with 8 counts of murder. A quote from the charge sheet. Elizabeth Tracy May Wettlaufer did commit first-degree murder on the person of, respectively, James Silcox, Maurice Granite, Helen Matheson, Gladys Millard, Mary Zurawinski, Helen Young, Maureen Pickering, and Arpad Horvath. The acts were contrary to Section 235(1) of the Criminal Code. Wettlaufer was taken to the Vanier Detention Centre for Women in Milton, Ontario, which is both a maximum and minimum security facility that houses short-term convicted criminals with many awaiting trial. November 2nd, 2016. Wettlaufer made a court appearance which would determine her next court date. She appeared via video link. It happened so quickly she said at the end, "That's it?" The Ontario Provincial Police advised the relatives of the victims not to attend the court appearances. James Silcox's daughter Andrea sat in back. She held the Bible her father carried with him as he fought in World War II. She told reporters she brought it with her, quote, "to honor my father and knowing that my father is with me, giving me strength through this whole thing." She said she was, quote, "very angry," end quote. She went on to say, "There's a lot more to every investigation, not just what we see on the surface. Things are going to go a lot deeper than what we see in there." November 18th. Wettlaufer appeared via video link for another court appearance. Arpad Horvath's daughter Susan attended the session. She told reporters she felt like she was attending her father's funeral all over again. She said, "I'm sad and I'm mad. It's hard. It's taking a toll on my health." November 20th. James Silcox's widow Agnes passed away, just 3 weeks after she was informed about the murder of James at the hand of Elizabeth Wettlaufer. December 8th, 2016. Susan Horvath was present at this session. She said seeing Wettlaufer on the screen, quote, "feels like punishment," end quote. She went on to say, "I'm traumatized, I'm angry, and I'm sad at this system. It's going to be a long haul for everybody. We'll see who ends up crazy waiting for this." January 13th, 2017. Wettlaufer appeared in court in person this time. This is a quote from an article published by the Woodstock Sentinel Review. The jingle-jangle of the shackles echoed through the basement hallway and into the Oxford County courtroom Friday, where Elizabeth Wettlaufer was escorted to the prisoner's box. The 49-year-old former nurse shuffled in, wearing a frumpy dark green jail-issued sweatshirt and pants, with a blank look on her face, hands linked together in the front, and the chain keeping her feet together, up the center aisle like a strange bride at a sad, confusing wedding. The room was silent, except for the clanging of her restraints. Due to the layout of the courtroom, Wettlaufer could not avoid walking past the relatives of her victims. New charges of aggravated assault against the Adriano sisters were brought against her. She was also slapped with attempted murder charges for Sandra Toller, Beverly Bertram, Wayne Hedges, and Michael Priddle. Andrew Silcox told reporters seeing Wettlaufer in the room was, quote, very hard to handle, end quote. Susan Horvath was frustrated by her inability to affect the legal proceedings, saying, I can't say anything to this individual, and I cannot do anything, end quote. She called for a provincial inquiry into nursing home care. She wasn't the first person to call for such a thing. Scandals regarding abuse and neglect at nursing homes in Ontario was a long-running scandal exposed by the Toronto Star newspaper as early as 2003. Arpad Horvath's son, Arpad Jr., told reporters he was shocked and speechless. He said Wettlaufer's appearance, quote, was the toughest 5 minutes of my life. Wettlaufer said nothing. The judge set her next appearance to be facilitated by video for February 15th. Arpad Jr. was asked if he felt it was worthwhile to be there. He said, yes, it was worth it because it's for my father, and I promised I would be here every court appearance for him, and I'm here for him, and here I am. He said every sighting of Wettlaufer, quote, makes me really angry every time, end quote. And, quote, every time I see her, I'm sick, end quote. June 1st, 2017. The day of Elizabeth Wettlaufer's trial. Relatives of the victims attended to ensure they would see that justice was served. Presiding over the trial was Justice Bruce Thomas. He asked Wettlaufer if she injected victims with insulin for no medical reason. Wettlaufer, yes, Your Honor. Thomas, you knew this to be fatal? Wettlaufer, yes, Your Honor. Thomas, you realize that first-degree murder is punishable with life in prison? Wettlaufer, yes, Your Honor. Elizabeth Tracy May Wettlaufer pleaded guilty to 8 counts of murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. Every victim's name was read aloud, and she responded by saying, guilty. Relatives of the victims wept as she did so. As details of the crimes were listed, some of the family members were unable to remain in the room. The hardest part for them was watching her videotaped confession to Nathan Hergott. It's hard to forgive someone who not only murdered someone you love, but admitted to laughing about it. Wettlaufer's recollections of the crimes were typical of a textbook sociopath. This was devastating for Arpad Horvath Jr., who said to reporters, quote, I can't forgive this woman for what she did. When I lost my father the first time, a part of me died. But the second time, my heart was ripped right out of my goddamn chest. He later said to CBC Radio, I'm not going to forgive her for nothing. She knew what she was doing. Victim impact statements. Donna Silva, daughter of Clotilda Adriano. There are no words that can describe the impact that Miss Wettlaufer's actions have had on me and my family. I wish I could verbalize my feelings so everyone could find out how I feel. Elizabeth Jane Silcox. I would have to say that 99.9% of the impact of my grandfather's murder has been on my emotional well-being. Everyone who finds out about this says the same thing. I feel like I may be feeling it differently than some of my family members, and that has been hard. Having a wedge driven between you and your family is heart-wrenching. I was getting ready to go visit my grandfather when my phone rang, and my grandmother told me through tears that he had died. I was heartbroken. This man took me into his home and treated me like a daughter when the rest of the world turned their backs on me. On the other hand, this was not the same man. The man that E.W. murdered who was not who you referred to as Mr. Silcox. He was not Jim, James, Lansing, or J.L. To me, he was living in hell. One minute he was himself, the next minute he was not. I found peace in the fact that he had found peace and had gone to be with his God. When I found out he had been murdered, I was torn because I still found that same peace in knowing he was not suffering anymore. I held on to the hope that maybe it was a mercy killing. However, we all know that was not true. That being said, I found peace in knowing that he was no longer suffering. When asked if I was mad about the murders, I could not honestly say 100% yes. This tore me up inside because according to the rest of my family and friends, I should be really angry. What makes me angry is the impact that has had on my family. It has torn us apart. Every one of his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren loved him. There's no question about that. Everyone is dealing with it differently, but automatically the finger of blame came out. Siblings blame siblings for choices that were made out of love and for his safety, as well as that of his wife. Really hard choices had to be made for the personal safety and well-being of J.L. and his wife of 62 years. Choices made out of love and trust in a system, trust in a facility, trust in a governing body, trust in an individual, a trust that was ultimately broken in the worst possible way. This murder, this break in trust, this terrible event has turned siblings against each other, broken up our family, and caused extreme stress and heartbreak on all of us. Heartbreak that goes beyond reliving my grandfather's death. I believe that my grandparents are now in a better place and see what is happening, and this rips my heart out. Knowing that the family they raised is being ripped apart by the actions of this woman, caused by the cold-hearted actions of E.W. E.W. didn't know my grandfather. He had not been there long enough for her to know anything about him. Yet she took it upon herself to be the judge and jury for his future. He was mean to his wife. He yelled out, "Let me tell you who he was. He was a boy who was abandoned by his mother at a very young age. He was a decorated World War II vet. He was a father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather. He built things. He snow-plowed the driveways and cut grass for the neighbors and wouldn't take payment. His family was gone and out of the house, and he took me in. He was a good man. Not perfect, but who is? He went from being all those things to slowly losing his mind and knowing it. He went from standing in the kitchen one day with his wife of 62 years to being immobilized in a hospital and subsequently in a nursing home. He was angry, he was insecure, he was terrified. All of his old fears that had stemmed from his childhood, through the war, through life, were coming at him. He was dealing with it the only way he knew how. Maybe if E.W. had taken the time to know my grandfather, she would have seen a different man and made different choices. But we will never know. My father had his father's genes. My aunts and uncles had their father's genes. My cousins, my children, I have my grandfather's genes. I am terrified that someday my dad or his siblings will have to go into a nursing home one day. It terrifies me that we cannot trust the institution with their loved one's life. Don't know what I am going to do if the time ever comes that I have to put my father in a home or my children have to put me in a home. The thoughts of this were scary before, but now they are almost debilitating, terrifying. I see a therapist who will hopefully help me be able to deal with these fears. But for now, I am working on making it through a day without tears for a man taken from us too soon, for a trust I may never get back, a fear that may never go away, and the loss of what was once a beautiful, strong family unit. The judge remarked about how Elizabeth Wettlaufer left a trail of broken lives behind her. Wayne Hedges' sister, Barb. Wayne was the youngest of 7 children. By the time he was 2, he had been placed for adoption and went into foster care. Our parents adopted him when he was about 3. I remember Mom telling us that Wayne would run away because he didn't think anybody wanted him. That is an awful way for a young child to feel. Wayne was wanted, and he was loved. Wayne passed away January 24th, 2009, and we grieved at that time. 7 years later, we receive a call saying he may not have passed from natural causes. My initial reaction was shock. Then came anger and disbelief. I have been left with this knot in my stomach that doesn't go away. My heart breaks when I wonder if Wayne knew what was happening, if he knew what she had tried to do. I worry that he spent the last 3 or 4 months of his life being afraid. I think about Wayne's life and how he never hurt anyone. His life was troubled, but it was his life, and nobody had the right to try and take that away. I go to the cemetery often and apologize to him. I tell him how sorry I am that we didn't know. I feel guilty for something that I had no control over. We lost our dad in 2011 and Mom just this February 2017. They both passed not knowing how their son died. We were hoping to have some answers, at least for Mom, but that didn't happen. I'm trying to let go of this anger because I have to. Anger will only keep me down. Anger does not change what is done, and it will not bring my brother back. I know that to completely move on, I have to forgive, but I am not there yet. In closing, I would like to say that at some point in time, Miss Wettlaufer will have to answer to a power much higher than this court. Jason Priddle and his wife Meredith Maywood addressed the court. Mike was a compassionate, caring individual with a big heart and a genetic marker to inherit Huntington's disease. The disease struck him in the prime of his 40s, slowly taking away his independence. We moved home to provide the care and extend the time he was able to live at home. When his care moved beyond what was possible at home, he tearfully had to move into long-term care. At first, he was at Parkwood in London, receiving wonderful care. When their service focus changed, he had to move. This is when we had to move to Crescent Care. Feeding Mike took time because he had difficulty swallowing and could choke. He also had involuntary movements of his arms and legs, but overall he was a small man who spent his days in a cushioned wheelchair with a safety belt to keep him from sliding out of his chair. Frail and weak are the words that come to mind. At night, his bed was lowered, with an additional mattress beside the bed. That way, if he fell out, there was less chance of injury. He could not walk. He could not speak. He could not defend himself. Yet he still had much of his mind intact. Up till he passed, we did not see him understand what people were saying to him, and he would try to respond at times in different ways. Easy enough to open your mouth to eat when asked, to lift a hand, but there is no way to communicate, "I am scared of her." Someone tried to kill me. Since news of the abuse our father suffered, we have been ruminating on what we missed. When he was agitated, was he somehow trying to communicate to us that somehow something was wrong, even though he didn't have the ability to verbalize it? There were many times he appeared anxious and agitated. Is this why? We will never know, but we will continue to feel an immense amount of guilt, anxiety, sadness, and anger. We keep asking ourselves, what other mistreatment did he endure? He was going through enough with his illness. He didn't need to endure unnecessary pain, stress, and physical damage. What was the long-term impact of this attack on him, physically and psychologically? While we feel for the families who lost a loved one, I can't imagine the fear he lived with knowing that she did this, and the anxiety he would have felt of what may happen the next time she visited his bedside. He could not run away. He could not cry for help. What psychological trauma did he endure? Our heart breaks thinking of the physical and psychological pain this attack caused to a strong man in a weak body. Remarks by Sandy Millard, Gladys's daughter. I find myself not wanting to leave the house. Stopped caring about doing my daily chores. Don't reach out to family. Don't know if they realize what my thoughts and feelings are about. Haven't explained it myself. I don't know what to think or how to feel about the facts. I try to get on top of my emotions and feelings, but they change daily. I hardly sleep at night and wake exhausted. I feel like only my immediate family has any idea of what I'm going through. In all my life, I never made my mother cry. It kills me to know that she cried when she was attacked by the last word in that sentence was censored by court officials. Sandy continued, I seem to have lost ambitions to carry out daily chores. I am having trouble getting and staying asleep. I will again contact a professional to help me understand how to deal with the murder in my family. I think I am depressed and have to fight my way back to sanity. I have received 4 or 5 visits from a social worker. Her cost is $125 an hour. I still need to receive more emotional therapy after the trial is over. None at this time. I do not think that many people who would associate with the offender would have any knowledge of myself or my family. I not only lost my mom twice, but the first one, I was with her in the room. It was not a peaceful death, but we thought it was a result of the morphine injections the nurses were giving her every 2 hours. Finding that she was murdered by a huge amount of a drug she did not need was at first unbelievable. Knowing that she suffered physically broke my heart. She fought the predator, cried out for over an hour. No one answered her. Colleen Matheson is a grandson of Helen Matheson. I am an industrial electrician. I work at a pulp mill performing routine, preventative, and emergency breakdown maintenance. During the course of a day, I work on equipment that can range from 120 volts up to 13,800 volts, all potentially lethal if not treated with proper safety. Over the past several months, there have been times when I was working where I've actually had to stop what I'm doing and step back and refocus on my task because my mind was wandering as I tried to make sense of what happened to my grandmother. When I think of everything that has happened, my first feeling is anger, bordering on rage, that someone could take someone I loved from me. How could someone like that be given any responsibility to care for so many vulnerable people? I realize this is an impossible task. You can't read another person's mind or predict what they'll do, so then I feel guilty. Why didn't I see that something was wrong? Why didn't I save her? In the end, I think that because I didn't see the signs that she was in danger, that maybe there weren't any, and I feel helpless and defeated. Spending any amount of time in that mindset is painful, so I'm going to try and focus on better memories of my grandmother. I called her Granny, and all my brothers and I did. I have lived in BC all my life. So whenever we traveled to Innerkip to visit Granny and Granddad, it was a major event for all us kids. Whether we flew or drove, we knew that when we got there, it would be a place where we could run wild on the property. Every meal seemed like a feast spread on the table, and she would always give me as much apple juice as I could possibly drink. When I was older, my wife and I made a trip to see her, driving across the country. She asked about all the things we had seen and told us about the changes around Innerkip over the years. The last time I saw her was at Crescent Care. She didn't recognize me. At first this made me sad. I shed a few tears in the car after the first visit. But after going back a few more times and introducing myself again, I found I would meet the same sweet, kind, and gentle-spirited woman each time, who was quick to smile and always wanted to see the photographs I had brought with me. Each time we would get to the picture of my son, the great-grandson that she never met, smiling as he was being pushed on a swing. She would laugh and say, "Oh, I want to do what he's doing. It looks like wonderful fun." She was happy then. That's how I'll remember her. A statement by Cheryl Kincaid. We are the family of Mary Zerwinski. When Mary was murdered, we lost a loving mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and great-great-grandmother. Our family has been struggling with pain, anger, and grief since learning how Mary's life really ended. 5.5 years after her passing in 2011, we had to begin the grieving process all over again, when told that she had not died in her sleep from a heart attack, as were originally told, but a nurse who was caring for her at Crescent Care decided to play God and end Mary's life. We, the entire family, have suffered emotionally, mentally, socially, and physically as a result of this crime. Some of us are suffering from chronic pain, fibromyalgia, sleeplessness, and other ailments brought on by and intensified as a result of having to deal with the stress and emotional strain this is causing us. Those who work find it difficult to concentrate and be productive, and our quality and quantity of work has and continues to suffer. We have had financial loss due to medical expenses from therapy and counseling, as well as lost wages from time missed at work. We suffer from depression and anxiety and no longer find the joy we once had from our social activities with family, friends, or the clubs and organizations we belong to. That joy was taken from us when Mary was deliberately taken from us. We worry and are fearful now as our family members continue to grow older. This criminal has weakened the trust in the professionals that we put our faith in to look after our aging family members. We fear that, had she not confessed, the power that this nurse had and the ability to execute plans, killing and hurting many vulnerable people without being caught, has weakened our faith in the profession and the senior care facilities. We find it difficult to maintain an overall happy and fulfilling family life anymore because this murderer so callously dismissed and placed such little value on Mary's life. This horrendous crime now consumes our thoughts and fills us with hatred and rage. These feelings are very foreign to most of our family members, especially given our strong faith in God. This same faith was used as an excuse and reason to kill. This is shattering to us. Mary's killer described her as, quote, feisty and fun, end quote. Yes, that was our mom and grandma. She was also a meek and gentle woman. A lady who, at 96 years of age, still enjoyed looking her best, complete with lipstick, jewelry, and nail polish. She was a compassionate, caring, and loving woman. She loved her family and always took pride in them and how she raised them. Mary looked good and felt good for her age and was looking forward to celebrating her 100th birthday. She was adamant that she would see the day and we would all be celebrating with a big party, eating cake adorned with 100 candles on it. She was robbed of that. We were robbed of that. Mary was made to die alone, without her family by her side, without a chance to even say goodbye. Helen Young's niece, Sharon, made the following remarks. My aunt, Helen Whitelaw Marshall Young, was probably always a determined individual, and sometimes a difficult and demanding personality. Perhaps because she was petite, she felt she needed to be heard, for she rarely stopped talking. When she was in her prime, her Scottish brogue was constantly in the background of all family gatherings, because an actual response to her chatter was rarely necessary. Helen was born in Edinburgh in 1923. Her father was a World War I veteran who worked for the British Railroad as an engineer when she was growing up. Her mother had lost her first husband in the war, prior to marrying Helen's father and having children. Helen's lifelong love of animals started when she took her little brother to the Edinburgh Zoo to allow her mother to complete housework. She was the apple of her father's eye, and he frequently liked to show off his bright and verbose daughter. Once Helen discovered the dance clubs of Edinburgh as a young teen, there was no looking back. She loved to dress up, wear heels, giving needed height to her 5-foot frame, and dance the afternoons away. She joined the Royal Navy at 16, as soon as World War II broke out in 1939. Helen was stationed at several outposts in Britain and worked in a variety of clerical jobs. At the end of the war, she was stationed in London, where she met her future Canadian husband, Peter Murray Young. They were married in 1948, but Helen had to wait a year for her orders to come through before she could meet her husband back in Calgary. When the orders finally came through in 1949, on the teletype machine she was actually working on in London, Helen up and left for Canada right then and there. As both of Helen's parents had died before the war's end, and her brothers sent to live with relatives, Helen was set for a new chapter in her life. Unfortunately, Helen and Peter did not have any children, but they generously took some of their young nieces and nephews on their travels. I recall taking a 2-week camping trip to PEI with Helen, Peter, and their 2 rather rotund dachshunds, in a small, well-traveled trailer. We had a lot of lovely trips and spent a great deal of time on the beach, one of Helen's favorite places. Helen's husband Peter died in 1988, and she was devastated. Helen was grateful that after some assistance from my father, Peter's brother, she could maintain her modest house and lifestyle. As Helen's health declined, she was unable to travel or get around Woodstock as much as she wanted to. She was remembered by several of the local cab drivers and bus drivers I have spoken to as a, quote, character, end quote, happy to point out their tardiness or other perceived service flaws. Helen was unable to care for her beloved pets as she got older, but I believe her last dog was possibly the most spoiled of all. I can recall one specific telephone conversation where Helen stated she had to put me on hold as she had to remove her dog's food from the microwave. After a bad fall and several weeks in the hospital, it became apparent Helen could no longer live on her own. It was one of the most difficult things I have ever had to do, placing someone in a long-term care facility. Knowing they didn't want to be there, trying to comfort them, with promises you would likely be unable to keep. Beth, for that is how I've always known you, you were the registered nurse who did the intake interview for Helen with me at Crescent Care in December 2009, reviewing her likes and dislikes and so on. I recall thinking at the time that you were not very empathetic to my tears, for someone who had chosen nursing as a career. Apparently, empathy was only the beginning of emotions that you lacked. The actions you took on July 13th, 2013 to end my Aunt Helen's life will forever haunt me. Before June 1st, 2017, my final memory of my aunt was her resting peacefully beneath a beautiful stained glass window in the funeral home's chapel. That comforting memory has been replaced now with one of her contorted in pain due to a seizure from the insulin you injected, with twisted limbs and bulging eyes, fearful, pain-filled, and tortured in her final moments of consciousness. And, Beth, you have added insult to injury by recalling in your confession that I hugged you and thanked you after my aunt's murder. So not only did I introduce my aunt to her killer by deciding to place her at Crescent Care, I also apparently thanked her for her actions. Betrayal doesn't even begin to convey my emotions. Yes, Helen could be difficult. The wife of one of Helen's dining room table mates, how she appreciated Helen's outspokenness, that Helen did not passively accept all the decisions that were often made on her behalf. Perhaps if Helen were more of her original self at the time of her murder, she would not have accepted an injection of anything. These are the type of what-if thoughts that had plagued me since October 2016, when I learned of my aunt's murder. While I am grateful to have been spared the trial process, the waiting, the days of trial and testimony, by a guilty plea, I will never be able to forget Helen's final moments, almost wishing that I was not aware of, quote, the truth, end quote. While these proceedings have brought anything but comfort, hopefully they will assist in benefiting other long-term care residents in the future by highlighting the institutional failures that allowed a murderer to continue to satisfy her needs repeatedly and unfettered over a period of nearly 8 years. I am a quiet, private person, and this has brought me to a level of public grief that very few people could imagine. I am left with an image of my aunt's final painful hours, and an image of my hugging and thanking my aunt's killer will always haunt my memory of my Aunt Helen. Susan Horvath said the following: My lifestyle changed for the worst since October 2016, when I was informed by the police of my father's possible murder. I slipped into a deep depression. I have become a hermit in my home. My energy and enthusiasm and any motivation for bettering my life has slipped away. My relationship with my mother is now very agitated and depressing. It seems like when we are together, there is this cone of silence. So long as we are just enveloped with sadness, tiredness, depression, and shock. I personally was ready to go back into my advertising business of 20 years, when or if I recover from my hip surgery this summer. Since I am in sales and media relations, my emotional, psychological health has been traumatized and still in shock, not having had time to even process. Financially, this has impacted me because I have government revenue proofs of the income my business was producing. I'm now concerned about where I will obtain livable income. I am very concerned because my concentration and my memory are very affected through all this trauma. I was always wanting to trust people and medical, but never did. The impact of this murder has now severely closed any remote ability for me to trust the medical industry, let alone people, pastors, and government institutions. In November 2016, I had a sweater made, quote, "Don't trust anyone," unquote. This life of mine will never be the same as long as I am alive. I have now lost hope in society more than ever. I am psychologically and physically drained. I am under the care of 2 counselors, one from Toronto and another from London. Both practice different therapy in their approach. I need them. I feel I could need treatment for the rest of my life just to cope with this horrific situation. The therapy for the one in Toronto is an expense. The other covers temporary victim services through the government. My trauma and psychological, emotional profile is broken down. My business generated 6 digits. Therefore, I do not know when or if I can ever return to work anymore, let alone my own business. One of the survivors of Wettlaufer's murder attempts, Beverly Bertram, gave a statement to the court. I have a secluded lifestyle, and I have no activities. I was more involved at church. We did coffee time. I sold cards. I used to do Sunday school, but I don't do any of that now. I am afraid to ask, afraid they are going to say, "You are not good enough," or "We can't count on you." Which is, they can't. People move on, but I can't. I don't want to leave my safe place. It's all I can have. This thing has really hurt me. I'm letting that... Court official censored the adjective Beverly used to describe Wettlaufer. Rule my life. I am too afraid to go to bed at night. So wound up inside, just thinking about doing something. I used to have people in my house pop in for a coffee, pop in for a talk. I am terrified if someone says they are coming by. I can't do it. I think sometimes I'd be better off if she had done her deed. I am afraid of my own shadow. People think she's mental. Well, what am I? Well, I've really changed since this happened. I have no relationship with my family because of it, and I resent that. It's like the last straw. Too much hurt, I guess. This situation on top of everything else is not good, and this family has been through a lot. I was pretty easygoing before, but now I'm looking for a fight. My feelings are really hurt easily. Ed and I could talk, play games, watch TV. We could communicate before. Now I am a burden. I can't seem to do anything, so he's got to do it. I have never been so ill without knowing what was wrong. It is really hard to describe. I knew I was dying. There was no control. I dirtied myself. I peed myself. I couldn't lay in my bed. I was constantly moving, trying to get up. It was terrible. No control over nothing. I was doubled over in pain with my stomach. Just such pain. My whole body hurt. I thought I was thrashing about, but I wasn't. That is how horrible the pain was. I couldn't sleep. I don't remember sleeping at all. When I went to the hospital, they gave me something to sleep because I had worn myself out so badly. I thought I was able to speak. I thought I was screaming, "Help me." But I was just moaning, I guess. My thoughts weren't with me. It was like an out-of-body experience. It was like I wasn't part of my body. The part of me out could see myself in bed. I couldn't understand why no one was helping me. I am retired, so I didn't have a job. The CCAC has taken care of my physical needs and emotional needs by supplying nurses and a counselor. I haven't had to put out money. The curtains are always closed. The doors are locked. I don't go out of my house. With my nursing and PSW, I don't have new people coming in. I don't need new people. It was 6 months before I went back to church. I was too afraid of new people looking at me and speaking to me. I didn't leave my house for 6 months. I was worried she would get out and come and finish the job. It's still hard to go out. Is a reporter going to come? Is someone going to say, "Oh, you're the person Elizabeth Wettlaufer tried to kill"? I don't know when it will be better. I miss my meetings at the women's group. I'm just afraid the conversation is going to come up. I can think of so many reasons not to go to church, and at one time nothing would stop me. I asked God to be with me. As long as I prayed, I was not afraid of dying. God was with me. I had peace. By the grace of God, I survived. I'm not sure why, but I will use my life the best I can. Life's been hard, but I will be okay in time. My husband and grandson help me, support me, and my church and family are here for me. In time, I will be okay. Will I forget? No. Forgive? That is what God would want. The police and Crown have done everything to keep me safe. After all the victim impact statements, it was Elizabeth Wettlaufer's turn to make a statement of her own. I am truly sorry for the people I injured and murdered. Sorry is much too small a word. That was it. Just as Thomas had doubts about her show of contrition, she was far from the angel of mercy. She indulged, quote, a 9-year killing spree, end quote, a, quote, shadow of death that passed over during the night shifts that she supervised. One option was to issue consecutive life sentences, which would have amounted to 200 years. Instead, he sentenced her to 25 years without eligibility for parole. Explaining this decision, he said, "Without her confessions, I'm convinced this offender would never have been brought to justice." She will be eligible for parole in 2041, though she is unlikely to be released. If she is, she will be old enough, and if her health deteriorates, she may end up in a nursing home herself. The location of the prison has not been publicly disclosed. She will now get her karma as she struggles to adapt to the institutional hardships of prison life. She just might end up as vulnerable as the patients she killed. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.